Good afternoon, Ms. Rati. Good afternoon, Mr. Sunil. Ms. Rati and Mr. Sunil, you both are on mute.
Good afternoon, Sujata.
Good afternoon. Okay, so it's
afternoon,
great. Mr. Sunil, I hope you can hear us.
Yeah, hi Sujata. Hi Rati, how are you?
Hello.
I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Sunil, actually, there's a bit of shadow on your face. I mean, we can't see. I think you're sitting opposite the light source.
Yeah, that's so that people are not able to see my expressions. Let me reorient.
This is a little better.
Okay, just hold on.
Sure. Yeah, but we would like to see your expressions. So
Just hold on.
sure.
Just give me a minute.
Sure, no problem. So, Ms. Rati, like we are currently live on YouTube and we will start in the next 5 minutes. So until then, you can stay on mute and you can turn off your camera.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes, it is certainly better.
Yeah, I think there is some issue in the camera maybe.
No, it's better. It's much better.
It's better? Yeah, okay.
So, Mr. Sunil, we'll be starting in a couple of minutes. So until then, you can stay on mute and you can turn off your camera. I will, give a cue to the speakers to turn on their camera.
Sure, okay.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sujata, the Associate Director with Creating Values Private Limited. I welcome everyone for the Qbinar of today, which is on the topic Talent Management for 2021, Future-Proofing the Way Ahead. We have been joined by HR and industry leaders who will be talking about the sort of practices that they themselves might have adopted within their organization for the talent management framework that they have built, and what is the way ahead, the kind of advice and learnings that they can share with the HR fraternity on this very enterprising and important topic for today. Just prior to we start the Qbinar, just a few reminders to our viewers. If you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to share those questions with us either over email, or you can use the chat box on YouTube, and on your behalf, I'll direct those questions to our panelists. Secondly, if you wish to, partner with us in any form for these Qbinars that we conduct, please contact Mr. Vivek Shastri. His email ID is currently on the slide, which is showcased. So without any further ado, I think let's just start with brief introductions, and then we will dive straight into the discussion. So a brief introduction about Creating Values. We are an ISO certified management consulting firm, and we provide consulting services to organizations across industries. The domains in which we provide our advisory services include people and culture, which is our HR advisory arm. Technology and risk is our IT consulting arm. Business strategy consulting, brand strategy consulting, and executive search consulting. In our, we are in our 8th year of operations, and we have till date completed more than 225 plus projects. We have worked across more than 18 industries, and we are proud to have a repeat order rate as high as 90%, because that talks about the quality of our service delivery. This is just a snapshot, a single slider of the kind of services that we can provide when it comes to people and culture, which is our HR advisory domain. And we would be happy to discuss any opportunities that are prevalent within any of your organizations, or any, challenges that you might be facing with regards to human capital and talent management. And we'll be happy to brainstorm along with you to either conduct any sort of diagnostics or even a futuristic framework for your organization for the effectiveness of the function and for the betterment of the human capital. So please feel free to get in touch with us, and we would love to discuss the possible areas of opportunities to engage. So without any further ado, let's start with the introductions about the topic of today, as well as the speakers who have joined us for this amazing discussion. As you can see, the topic is talent management for 2021, future-proofing the way ahead. And, it's time for a fundamentally new approach when it comes to talent management, especially given the uncertainties that businesses might be facing today. And we can't even predict what the future, holds for us. So talent management, as you all understand and would agree, is a continuous journey. So there are certain interventions that might now require, a refocus, a realignment in order to strengthen the talent pool and to make the organizations more resilient. We've been joined by subject matter experts, and it is my privilege to actually interact with these dignitaries and to have this amazing discussion with them. So we have with us Ms. Rati Diwan. She is the head HR VP and talent management and organizational development for Max Bupa Health Insurance. She has more than 16 years of professional, enriching and diverse experience in HR strategy, conceptualization and execution for enabling higher business value proposition. She has been instrumental in creation and execution of people agenda to aid higher growth and efficiency for sustainable business model. She has led multiple OD initiatives, and her initiative on living our values got recognized as top 30 best practices at international best practice competition. Our next speaker is Mr. Sunil Omangar. He is the Vice President Learning and Organization Development with Fortis Healthcare Limited. With over 2 decades of experience in learning, talent management, organizational development, leadership development, and quality across healthcare, telecom, manufacturing, and IT companies. He's skilled in conceptualizing, strategizing, designing learning solution, and has trained many facilitators. So let's start with the discussion of today. I would request the speakers to turn on their cameras and to unmute themselves. And the first question that I wish to pose to the speakers, I would keep it common. So I would first request Ms. Rati to share her insights, her views on it, and then we could move to Mr. Sunil for his views. So Ms. Rati, while devising the plan of talent management for 2021, what key pointers should HR leaders consider in today's scenario?
Thank you, Sujata, for the question and wonderful introduction. A very good evening to all the people who are part of this discussion. Uh, you know, times have changed. Traditionally, the way we used to see HR leaders, the way we used to see talent management practice is no more the same. This pandemic has really taught us new ways of doing things, new ways of learning things. Hence, I think in my own experience and whatever I have gathered in the last 12 months, I think starting from hiring, the way we used to hire people, the way we used to train them, motivate them, upskill them, the way we used to do appraisal, everything has gone a change. So the entire gamut of talent management from onboarding till the time they are even exiting the organization, everything has gone digital. So I think an important aspect that we should consider in the coming months or the coming year is that how do we humanize the entire machines that we have developed and created around us? Because whatever said and done, the entire automation, the entire digitization is going to stay, and it has helped us overcome this entire pandemic. So how do we bring in that human touch to the machine is something that we should consider. Secondly, the fact is that we will have a lot of our talent who will be operating from different parts of the country. This coronavirus has not restricted itself to a particular border. It has gone beyond borders. So similarly, why should we restrict ourselves when it comes to talent? So we've got the entire ocean which is available with respect to talent. How do we tap them? How do we engage them? How do we ensure that we are able to leverage their expertise, irrespective of the fact wherever they may be sitting in the world? I think that's the other piece we should look at. Uh, Thirdly, I think the other aspect is traditionally when we say building culture, it has always been about you're in that particular office, any kind of interventions we roll out. It's always been about this particular corporate office, this particular branch office. Now we have to build that culture outside the building. Yeah. So how do we ensure that we have a similar, consistent experience that we are creating for people who are sitting in remote locations? We need to ensure that that particular touch or the culture that we want to bring for the organization is consistent outside the building as well. Because many organizations have shifted to work from home. So it's not, or not even work from home, it's actually work from anywhere. Many organizations are following that route. So how do we create that kind of building the culture outside the building is the other aspect. I think the last piece which comes to my head right now, which is another important aspect with respect to talent management, is how do we move away from the traditional competencies that we used to look at earlier, right? In the current setup, it's all about agility. It's all about managing the crisis. It's about how comfortable we are with respect to technology, right? So these competencies have to be given much more importance. How are we able to manage people remotely rather than just having that face to face or human touch when you're sitting together? We need to remodel the competencies that were existing for so many years, and we need to look at how do we develop our people, how do we hire people with respect to this particular competencies. I think that's my take in terms of the talent management, how it's going to come up in next couple of years.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Rati. In fact, quite holistically you've put up, very pertinent points. But I loved the way when you talked about your first point, that is humanizing technology. So, we've been for the entire pandemic period, organizations and even HR leaders have been talking about HR automation. So it's always been how do you automate HR processes, but it's interesting to say how do you humanize technology. So that's a very interesting thing. But prior to I move to with the same question to Mr. Sunil, just one disclaimer to our speakers as well as to the viewers who will be watching it. Although technology has enabled this session and has enabled the entire year of working from home, but still in case there's a technological glitch from our end, and if this session gets disrupted, please do not go away. We will reboot and restart with this session. So please stay with us. And secondly, on a non-technological aspect, I have two pets at home. So if they start barking uncontrollably, please do not get alarmed. I'll just go on mute for a couple of minutes. And once they calm down, I'll start speaking again. And at that time, I would expect my speakers to take over and continue the discussion.
Sure.
So, Mr. Sunil, the same question to you, that what would be your advice? What key pointers would you say that HR leaders need to consider in today's scenario when they're devising the talent management plan for 2021?
So I think Rati did a fantastic job of giving a overview. So today is I'm on a leave, so I just want to contextualize this talent management business, considering that everyone is a talent, and so one can consider oneself as a talent. So from a talent management perspective, today I am on leave because of something that my son was appearing for an exam. Now, two things both of you people spoke about, and it immediately touched. And this has been a case over a period of 1 year. When our family members go to the office, the family members are expected to follow the rules of the office. Now the office has come to the work. Okay, so office has come to the home. I think it's okay for dogs to bark and something that you see behind and some movement and all those things, it's okay. And this is what, I'm just taking this example, this is what we all need to learn as a result of what Rati beautifully put. I had not thought of that word, but she beautifully put humanizing the technology. It's humanizing the whole process. Now, the second advantage of it, imagine if Qbinar was happening somewhere else and you would have reached out, and Sujata, you would have reached out and said, no, traffic is there. I don't think I'll be able to come. Now, I had to leave my son at 2:30. So I left him, came back. Again, I could freshen up. And now I'm here 4 to 5. And just after this, I have to go out and pick it up. So these are the advantages of digital landscape that has brought the aspect to the whole thing. From an HR leader perspective, this is also something which everyone needs to look at it, and just not talking from HR, but even from an employee point of view. The best is available now. Best is available to you. So please understand that earlier, many of these strategies were local. Oh, this person will be available. This person will be here. And hence, but now please imagine that anywhere in the world, not only in India, a best person can be available digitally to solve anything that is there or consult anything that you have to do in terms of doing that. Now, what is that HR leaders need to learn from this aspect is to search for best, is to search for best. Sometimes we tend to not search for best. And second is the traditional mindset is, if you are visible, if you are in front, then things are in control. That means people are working. This is the traditional, and we may say a lot of English, but when we go back to corporate world, even in today's world, in the best of the progressive organizations, you will find the bias of HR leaders and business leaders that person samne dikhna chahiye. So what has COVID posed? COVID has also posed few very fundamental human questions, and that's where I would do that. It's brought out people's greed. How much, I know you're talking of talent management, people talk about career growth, positions, titles, and this thing, but COVID has brought that out. That's not all that important. So greed is out there. What do the HR leads? How do you do that? How are HR leaders going to motivate people? The simplest way of motivating people is dangle a carrot and say variable pays, ESOPs, money, and things like that. So you kind of play on that. When we come to this forums, we speak a lot about philosophy, but the actuality is we dangle something. But that's gone. That's somewhere everyone has realized how much. And I think that's the question that COVID has asked: how much? Are our HR leaders ready for that? I don't think so. We are ready for that. Are we answering that question? How much? That changes the talent management strategies to a fundamentally different kind of a thing. We have been talking about, and I know there will be subsequent questions, but we're talking about the job enrichment, the lateral movement, the experiences that are to the fore. And that's where one has to fundamentally reorient oneself in terms of doing that. The second part of it is the meaning part of it. Obviously, we have families to run. There are certain social statuses that we need to maintain, some fundamental materialistic things that need to maintain, and we got into those kind of habits where certain level of status needs to be there if you are in corporates. I think this fundamentally has changed in a way that's not required. That is not required. So the talent management strategies primarily have to be on three things now, very clearly on three things. One is it increasing the personal mastery? So when person is coming on the job, how is that helping to enhance the personal mastery? And everything needs to be pegged at that. So if you work well, you do well, you are becoming a personal master. And from a framework, talent management strategy framework, that's one thing. That has been there in the form of, then it has changed in the form of competence, and then competence is for organization. So there is a utilitarian aspect of it. I want to use the utilitarian aspect out of it and say HR leaders need to fundamentally look at personal mastery. So they need to focus on everything that we do for talent is personal mastery. The second is sense of duty. This is very important. We have lost this sense of duty. We work if I get this. We work if I get this. If I don't get this, then I'm frustrated. I will move out to something else. So this sense of duty, has to be brought in this. And the third higher order that needs to be brought in practice is, I call it very clearly, unselfishness. Okay, unselfishness, and it can't. We are not evolved to that place. I think, if I were to make a general comment, we tend to be very myopic about our needs and if they are met or not met. But I think HR leaders need to step up themselves, including us. We are also HR leaders. Step ourselves. Am I doing something that is leading to personal mastery? Am I doing with a sense of duty? And am I doing with an unselfish purpose? I think the COVID heroes, if you look at COVID heroes during this, and I come from an hospital industry, I mean, people who have been unselfish, people who have been there, working hard, doing that, is there. Are we able to acknowledge that enough? Are we doing that enough? Is the whole thing. So it's all about paying attention to this aspect. A person who is focusing on personal mastery, are you paying attention to it as an HR leader? Are you driving your policies and strategy to promote that aspect of personal mastery, sense of duty? And I would call it out unselfishness. And that's a very, very, sometimes I don't want, we may use the word philosophy here, but this whole aspect of unselfishness is very critical as we drive this talent management strategy. So I know there will be more questions and specific questions of competencies and things like that. So I'm just holding myself there.
Sure.
And this time I would say, even if it does not make sense to anyone in the audience, still I'm very convinced about what I am saying. for a
Okay,
change.
great. So we have two speakers, and both speakers have taken a very different stance on the kind of views and the kind of suggestions that they are giving to HR leaders. Mr. Sunil, like you're asking very hard questions that needs to question themselves on, and you're rightly mentioning that you are a part of that HR fraternity that needs to ask these questions. So that's interesting, and how based on these philosophies as well as certain practical interventions, how should the HR plan the talent management framework for 2021? So that would be an interesting way to see, and I think only time would tell us that how many really embarked on that journey of transformation. So let's.
Sujata, in fact, I would say what Mr. Sunil is saying, I tend to agree. So it's not that it's a different stance, and both of us actually come from health sector, and we have seen the last 12 months how difficult it was. You know,
Certainly.
our people were on the field; they were out there to help people either recover from this illness or support them in the worst times that any one of us have seen. So I think unselfishness, what he's saying, is
Mm.
absolutely right, and I think we can't realize the importance of it as much we have understood in the last 12 months. So I'm absolutely for it, and I agree that whatever we are saying, one, I am saying I am not an expert, and whatever we are saying, we all are learning from each other.
Yeah,
It's a journey for us as well.
yeah, yeah. Echo that, Rati. Yeah.
But the main point here is that whatever the pandemic might have taught us, is it human nature that we would forget the instance everything goes back to normal? So that rather is the question that businesses, and obviously every HOD, it could be IT, it could be HR, every HOD needs to question in the coming time, that once things go back to normal, is business also as usual, or do we take forward the learnings from the pandemic? So moving forward, my next question is, Ms. Rati, to you. So, and I mean, some questions are such that we have to address the elephant in the room, and then we would progress to more broader as well as some very critical questions. But one of them is like, millennials do have a lot of expectations. We are talking about baby boomers. We are talking about even Generation Z now coming in. So they have a lot of expectations from their employers, from their companies. However, our business priorities may not be entirely aligned with that. So, how do you think that this gap can be bridged?
I think, Sujata, this is something which has been there for years, and it's not something that we experienced only now. Um, and it's a change that we all are embracing, because the traditional way how we used to operate, we have also moved away. We are also changing our own game. So the typical way, for example, how we used to celebrate service anniversary, we used to give those watches. And I mean, I started my career with Crompton Greaves, which is a manufacturing firm. I still remember when somebody used to retire, we used to give those shawls to our blue collared people. All of that is really gone. Today we are talking about the millennials who say that I want instant recognition. I do my job, you immediately tell me what should I get. Even when we are rolling out any policy, I always think, and I always brainstorm it with my team to say, let's think from their perspective, that what is in it for them. I mean, they will not just take anything that you give it to them. So you have to tell them that how are they getting benefited by anything that you roll out. Today we have rolled out our entire platform for recognition, where you get, for example, if you're recognized for a particular award, you go on to a Zozo website and you're able to redeem it whatever way and form you want to. So we are not restricting that only you will get, for example, maybe a Mobla pen or something, but you have the options with yourself. Today they talk about that we don't want that my celebration should be in a closed room. I want to celebrate it on my social media. So we are trying to build that as well. And I think the only way we could possibly do, or the way possibly I have seen and I'm doing it, we make them part of these discussions. So whenever we are looking at rebooting any of the policies or any of the practices, we create a cross-cultural team, and wherein we have people from all the generations from different functions, and then we invite ideas. So because a lot of times we also tend to, think in a particular way. How do we broaden our own thinking? Is by inviting them to be part of these sessions and say, how do we move forward from here? So I think that's one of the ways how we could possibly build that gap. But I don't think that's the only solution. That gap will widen. How quickly we are able to bridge that gap is something that we have to work on. But I don't think we have all the solutions to say, because there are different needs, and it's very difficult to address to all those needs. While I'm not saying that we should have a simple cut piece wherein everybody should fit in, that is why we are introducing different methodologies, different practices. But I think for me, this has really worked, that we invite them to be part of these discussions, and then we change our practices based on the suggestions that we get from them.
Well, that's a very interesting thing. And that's, I think, probably something which is very practical to put into action, that involve the people, whoever might be your, your target audience, involve representatives from the target audience to, while the brainstorming happens, while the strategizing happens, so that obviously you might end up getting relevant ideas, and B, the adoption of whatever you put forth would be faster, and would be obviously accepted open-heartedly. So that's an interesting thing. Mr. Sunil, your video has frozen. So are you? Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So you moved. Okay, I thought we lost connection with you, so I just thought of cross-checking. Great. So with that, let's move to the next question. And Mr. Sunil, my next question is for you. That the decade of 2010 saw a very minuscule adoption of assessment centers in the overall talent management strategy. So at what rate do you see this adoption to increase within this decade?
You should have asked this question to a futurist. A few things that I will speak from my experiences in the past 1 year. So normally you do e-learning programs, but in this 1 year with no cost, nothing, and we didn't have the money, because of all what it was. And I have a team of almost 22 people. And we started building micro-learning on our own, which is, there are two parts to it, and I'll answer that question by giving this experience, micro-learning, which is we build 2 to 6 minutes of video-based, which is called as video plus PPT. So you use the PPT and convert it into video, and then you pass on voiceovers and things like that. So we learned on our own and built it, and we started creating 6 to 7. The point here is two things. One is the attention span. The traditional assessment centers, it's one is the cost factor. So that's the other factor. So micro learning, working on your own, and then doing all these things. So to answer your question on assessment centers, please let's look at the attention span of what's happening to the attention span of people. And the second aspect is to look at the digital landscape that is getting created as we are going through. So I know there are certain assessment centers and virtual assessment centers that started getting created in terms of doing that. But the future is in having the observations done in minimal time. Now, what does a micro-learning do? A micro-learning brings about almost a huge amount of information, and you use huge amount of design and conceptual skills to ensure that the message and the key points are taken to each individual in the form that is in there, right? So once you have created that at a very cost effective, which was nil for us, and then you can distribute it to all the people that is in out there for them to look at it and create a small test and and so on and so forth. So in 5 minutes, you are doing some kind of bringing the attention. Now that needs to bring their attention, observation, and things like that. In assessment center, one would have to look at the cost, time that it has to look at the cost factor. The second is design in a manner that it brings tremendous amount of observation into fold, right? If you look at the latest work that is happening by Kahn and Gegenrenzer, and there is huge amount of work that is beginning to happen on, and I think the Blink, the book made it more famous, but fundamentally, if you look at it, the researchers that started in 70s on this field are now picking up things which is called as heuristics, right? And I'm not talking of biases. Normally people call it as cognitive biases, but these are something called as unconscious reasonings of this. Assessment centers need to look at those dimensions. So the word center has to go, and the assessment needs to move to the field of observation. How quickly you make the observation. You know, most of the people rely on interviews and use their intuitive aspects to the whole thing. And I'm not professing any of that. I'm saying, how do you are able to quickly bring observations onto the floor, onto the ground for people to decide whatever it is? A. B. Performance is the biggest predictor of things, but performance only tells about past, not about future. And hence, assessment centers need to focus on that aspect, but to be able to quickly create a scenario and do it. That's about it. How much time does it take? A 5-minute scenario to be able to put people into threefold kind of a things. So assessment centers, I think, need to get into the whole makeup of interactions, and from there look at all these aspects. My own sense on assessments, traditional assessment centers is not going to work. Even virtual assessment centers have their own limitations, because there is the human interaction goes a little awry in that sense. So to answer that question, the assessment design will have to get through a fundamental change and really bring two elements to it: cost and attention. If they are able to focus on this, how to bring the attention, get the attention and observations, and the second part of cost, then assessments are there. Ultimately, people are taking calls on evaluations, judgments, and all those things. What assessments do is bring in objectivity to all these things, but it needs to bring that forth right now, not by the traditional assessment center. So there is a downside. I think it will take 2 to 3 years for people to come up with those kind of solutions, and we may see a different kind of an upswing. The other thing that assessment center will have to fight is artificial intelligence. There is so much data that is available all over the world, all over the place about you. Imagine someone getting onto my LinkedIn, getting into my social this thing, and there's 100 things. And artificial intelligence will be soon becoming a predictor. The third thing, I was talking to Paul Zak. Paul Zak is the person who works on trust and this. You know, the other day I was talking to him, and he's created a smartwatch. And in that smartwatch, right now, Rati is there, I am there, you are there, and there will be various participants. If you put on the smartwatch, it will get into your cognitive brain. They're using the cognitive neuroscience, and immediately it will get to know what were the places where Rati lost interest, the place where you lost interest. Did all the participants lose interest? What were the places where all the participants took a spike? So there are certain words that are going on. So you can mask it, but when looking at, so they've created that kind of thing. Those things will start coming into vogue. That means day-to-day practices. From there, the data will start coming and getting into all these domains. So I would see that as the future. I don't know whether I'm correct, wrong. I have no clue. I have not done study. I have not researched on it. This is more of intuitive response to your question. I hope it helps.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Sunil. In fact, quite interesting things that you've put up there. First of all, yes, when you say that, to cater to an audience, especially thinking from the perspective of attention span, yes, micro learning and, small pieces of learning doses would really help. But that's the aspect of learning. That's the aspect of taking it and rather developing your talent. And, maybe another aspect that you touched upon, which is very, very clear and very right, is that cost and traditional assessment centers, these things need to be relooked at. So maybe not entirely a virtual assessment center might be an answer, and not entirely a traditional assessment center might be an answer, but somewhere a hybrid, and most importantly, customized assessment centers is the answer. Because like you rightly mentioned, it is how quick the observations come up, and that is where the role of certified assessors comes into place, and how the entire assessment center is designed. How do you use games, how do you use interesting exercises, that without even giving away the information of what is being assessed, you ultimately keep the attention of the assessed employees, and manage to find out where what are their strengths, what are the improvement areas, where do even they are where there are spikes in the way they are reacting and executing a certain task. So that's the beauty of customized assessment centers, wherein even the costs should be taken into consideration. And thus the names that you mentioned, I think, versus then the smaller players, the new entrants in the space are trying to make that difference. And even without sounding salesy or without sounding arrogant, this is the area that we are striving very hard to work upon, because these are the challenges that even we've heard our clients day in and day out tell us, that where they are losing faith in this entire system, what are the areas that they need to be plugged in. And rather, we fought with our clients wherein they wanted a traditional way, and we said, no, first of all, let's look at the right way of doing it, and let's design it to answer and give you solutions to your problem, rather than I just giving you a report which, maybe even online you might have received and you have done anything about it. So that's the whole point. So that's where, we need to look at partners who can really try to answer what's for you and what is your need, and accordingly take it forward. So that's how it is. And when you talk about AI and ML, I hear you, and I know that that's the future, and that's the area where HR fraternity is now looking up to, is hoping that things would come in. But that wouldn't that kind of hit us hard on the cost front, and would take time for the entire maturity in the process to come in. So I think the journey might be towards taking up and adopting customized assessment centers, and then in the future looking at what AI can actually give us to work with. So with
AI not necessarily is very costly. Imagine you have a smartwatch, and I have experienced that, and imagine you have a smartwatch, and most of the people are carrying smartwatches. Nowadays, the smartwatches are also coming very at a lower price. And the only thing is, there is an app, and as you go about 1 hour, there are certain things that you're saying, I am saying, and there are certain things that are going below, which is emotions going into the cognitive brain. And that's not very costly, actually. So what I'm trying to impress upon is a lot of things are happening out there. I think your first question, how open we are as HR leaders, is the parameter. And if we are not open, there is no way that we can work through with our employees and our business leaders. Because not oft it is said, talent management, while we talk about performance based and competency based and all those things, there is an element of politics that continues to work, the element of chemistry that continues to work when we start looking at So I'll hold back. I think then I'll get
I
into hierarchies and things like that.
No,
But
I completely
yeah.
and in fact, point taken. What you mentioned now also are very important points. It is about, when we talk about assessments, and maybe let's leave the centers apart from it. But like you mentioned earlier, it's the objectivity that would come into the process. It is the biases, the affiliations that people have, the politics that works. Those things can be eliminated if a proper streamlined structured assessment is brought into play. And very rightly mentioned, it's not just about performance, because it's about historical. What about the future? What about the potential? So from that perspective, the assessments should be able to give you an eye into the future, and what's the potential, where that individual can really take. Has that individual stagnated on a certain competency or on a certain skill, or is there still scope for that individual's further progression? So those are the things that everyone needs to answer. The partners who work on these services and these portfolios, as well as the HR leaders and TM gurus like you, to together holistically design something that works, and that works beautifully, mainly in our Indian industrial setup as well. So with that point, I think let's move, because I know you're a little short on time. So let's try that we wrap the next questions little quickly, so that we have your responses before you have to take a leave. So, so the next two questions, I'm keeping them common to both the speakers. So Ms. Rati, if you could quickly share your views on this, like competencies are considered to be the bedrock of talent management, and you've previously also touched upon that, how competencies are changing with these times. So, but when it comes to competencies, either organizations are still not developing them fully. So what would be your advice to the fraternity? That why competencies are important to be properly designed and documented.
Sure. And Sujata, possibly I will just go back to the earlier discussion regarding assessment center, and then I will link my answer to this. While we talk about assessment center, one, somehow we have glorified it more than it's really required. We use it to say that, oh, we've been doing ACDC. We're talking about a lot of aspects around it. But I think the fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves, I mean, I'm talking about we as HR leader, is that relevant in my context? Secondly, how will I use the outcomes that I get out of it? We do this assessment center very beautifully. I mean, either in person or through virtual mode. I did assessment center through virtual mode also in 2-3 months back. So it does throw data on your face, and my managers were really aghast to say that, okay, I thought this guy is a great performer, but your report says something else. So yes, it does bring in a different perspective to it, but then what do we do out of it is the whole question. And that really brings me back to the question that you just raised. When we have this data in front of us, when we have listed down, okay, that these are the competencies which are required for my organization, giving the maturity of the business where I am, how do I develop those competencies? I may have identified X person as a high potential. I've used my 3x3 matrix. I've done all of that. I've identified somebody as a high potential. But when it really comes that that particular position is vacant, for which I had mapped him 2 years back to say that I will grow this person to this particular position in 2 years, when that position is actually vacant, immediately we as HR leaders, we start looking in the external market to hire
Or an outside hire.
Right? So then what is the point of having this exercise if we cannot groom our own talent? Yeah. So that's the point I was making, that it's just, we shouldn't just do it for the sake of doing this exercise, but the whole intent is how are we able to develop our people basis their own potentials, basis their own growth path that they have charted out for themselves. Yeah. And are not necessary that, for example, you've got 8 competencies, you need to develop your entire organization on 8 competencies. Not necessary. And I think that is probably one of the reasons why we failed. We should pick up only 1 or 2 competencies to say that for this particular set of my leaders, or in the given context of the business for this particular year, I am going to develop only on these particular two competencies. Yeah. And then focus my efforts on that and have a dipstick check, after every quarter or after every 6 months, and not wait for that 1 year to get over and then again do a talent assessment. Yeah, I mean, then it's not going to happen. So I think that's one piece we should really look at. Also, given that so much has changed in the last 1 year, we need to relook at the traditional competencies, the point that I raised earlier. They may not be relevant anymore. So possibly, uh, trust is a very important aspect. When we expect people to work from home or from anywhere, do I really trust my team member that yes, they're sitting in X location, they're actually working and not watching Netflix? Yeah. How do we build that trust in our people so that they empower their team to perform better? How do we ensure that the sense of ownership, the point that Mr. Sunil made earlier, how do we ensure that people have that sense of ownership, that they give it back to the organization and not always take it from the organization? Those are the aspects that we have to build. And I think it is possible. It's not that it is not possible, but we need to be realistic to say that this is where I want to chart my way for this particular year, and not just take up everything to say that this is what I will develop in terms of competency. I think the other aspect that I want to add here is when it comes to assessment center or talent management, we talk a lot about competency. Somewhere we miss on the values. Values form very, very integral part of our upbringing. And when we see a mismatch in terms of my personal value and organizational value, that's where the disconnect really happens. And at least that is what we here at Max Bupa, we ensure at the time of hiring, at the time of talent management assessment, we check the value fitment at every stage. And I think that's really a very important aspect to say, is the match between personal and organization value happening or not? If it's happening, it's a great match. Otherwise, I think there will be trouble that we should expect in the days to come.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Rati, for your reviews. In fact, quite interesting things that you mentioned. One very right point that you said at the start was what do we do of the results? And and not just doing assessment centers for the heck of doing assessment centers, which is absolutely right. So have your objective clear. Have it clear that what would you do of the assessment results? Is your intention of developing people for whatever competencies they are lacking? Or is your intention of actually plotting your high potentials for futuristic succession planning, the way you mentioned, and then developing them for that role, and obviously communicating to them that this is where do we see you for the next 2 years, so that when that role is vacant, you don't go for an external hire and that individual also sticks with the organization. So yes, having the objectives very clear, that what would you do with the data that once you receive from the assessment centers. So that's interesting, and that's something that we've also been explaining to the clients, and we've been showing them practically that this is the kind of data that you need to work upon. It's ultimately your people, your talent, and it's in black and white. So that's how it is. And secondly, when you mentioned about values, yes, that's bang on. But are your values only for unfortunately for most organizations, it happens that the values are either single word or maybe at the most a one-liner definition, and then they are for the websites, and then they are for the beautiful beautification of the walls in the companies and and at the shop floors. But our values for that are behaviors defined. Do your competencies also have a linkage with your values? Because when you derive role-based competencies, which are a mix of behavior and functional or technical competencies, that's where you can see that are your values also reflecting in the behaviors which were defined for the competencies. So, and then percolating not just values, the behaviors as well as the competencies through your employee life cycle for all of this. Because until and unless you don't percolate it, until and unless you don't answer that pertinent question for your employees, that what's in it for me, why should I practice a certain set of values? What do I get out of it? Until and unless you don't even answer that, there would always be a disconnect. So these are very important aspects which are unfortunately subjective in many organizations, but which should be made objective. And I think 2021 might be a good year to, embark on that journey. So with that, Mr. Sunil, if you could also share your views on the competencies part about, that organizations have not fully developed them. So how should they go about it?
I think that brings back the question to how do we look talent management as? And do we look at it from a hierarchical point of view, or we can look at it from a lateral point of view? There is too much stress, I believe, in this system on leadership and top leaders, and too little acknowledgement of the group work that happens. That I think what competency framework seems to be individualistic in nature. What are the behaviors that lead to superior performance? As if there are individuals who can lead to, and I have done all my, it's not that I think 10 to 12 years I am an assessor, I have done this. I have come to, so this is between 2000 to 2014. I know, Rati, I'm old, so pardon me for that, but 2000 to 2014, 2013, I think. And over a period of time, see, competence is very individualistic in nature. We also are, as HR leaders, as businesses, as communities, focusing too much on leadership, while there is tremendous work that the group does. And we are not in the shape to let that credit and acknowledgement and everything go to the group. And when we start looking at groups, then everyone has got different kind of behaviors, different kind of, when does a team work? When we accept people for different strengths and we accept people for different weaknesses, we accept, and that's where the group becomes a team. Now, that does not, competency does not seem to be looking, the competency seems to be looking like a khacha. This ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, if someone is there, okay, he moves up because it is very easy. In our IR days, it used to be very simple. It's very easy to handle 12 union members rather than handle all the 100,000 employees in terms of doing that. So it's very easy to handle one leader rather than the group. So for me, that question has to be looked from fundamentally very different view. And if we are looking at groups, then what are the competencies that we are looking at? Then one person has one strength, second person has another strength. So what are we talking about? And till they don't come together, how does that happen? So that is something that has to be, that is not getting any weightage or attention, it seems like, in various things, and hence it seems to be individualistic. And so if someone has this competency, he will go up the ladder. If not, then they will do that. So talent management fundamentally has to be totally tops down and looked at from this way. Okay, I'm making this physical gestures encompassing. It needs to look at laterally rather than just look from a hierarchy point of view. And HR leaders, as your first question, HR leaders need to look at this very clearly in terms of at least have debates, because there are many brickbats that are going to come when you start talking about all this, and that is there. To answer your question, since you called me in this thing, next time she will not call me. A question pucha, answer kuch diya, sawal kuch pucha, question kuch kar diya. So to answer your question, I think 4 things that competencies need to look at. One is digital literacy, I would say, is something that is not there in the traditional competency dictionaries, but digital working with virtual teams are there, but digital literacy is something that needs to be there. I think there needs to be a huge emphasis on nurturance, I would call, not just development of others, but nurturance. And I would go and say that this is where women score over traditional male. The femininity is required, the strength of femininity is required for nurturance. And women seem to have that very clearly, much more than the male folks. And that has to be the trend from a competency point of view, whether you hire, fire, or you develop. That nurturance has to be developed. And there are various ceilings that are there for many things. So this whole, the traditional way you say, we normally say as a woman activist, you say, no, there are ceilings. True, there are ceilings. Let's look at development. There are so many ceilings on development. What Rati said is, why are we not looking internally on the people to be groomed? Because it is to do with this aspect of, I am calling it out, femininity, nurturance is to do with that. I'm not saying male do not have femininity. Sorry, we can go into Jung and talk about all that, but that is required for development, and that gets the last one. That gets the previous reference, and hence you require competence se jyada. It may help if you have more women leaders. Automatically, rest of the things will start happening. I am telling you that. I hope I don't lose my job after this. In terms of the other aspect of it is the orientation of short term versus long term. You know, the typical business mindset is, and this is for HR, this is typical business mindset is, oh, share bazaar to 3 mahine mein hota hai yaar. They do not wait for all this nonsense. You know, the share market reacts immediately. It's on the quarterly result that we give. And it's fact. You require money, you require cost. I'm not saying that it is not a fact. But that does not mean that anything to do with the people front is taken on the back seat in the name of those 3 months. So there has to be a long-term orientation for progressive, and various researchers tell that, whether it is Heredigious or all the people that talk about organizations that are doing that. But in day-to-day practice, I think this is something needs more development of other short-term versus long-term digital literacy, and what I call as nurturance. So I think this is four. So I think I have answered your question, and you will let me go in another 2 minutes, please.
Yes, certainly, Mr. Sunil. But you know, when you were giving your answer, the interesting thing that caught me was like, when you're talking about the competencies, from what I can infer from your response is that it's about you know, the already set and the standardized frameworks which are out there, and that is why we strongly advocate that there should be customization, because that is where, when you know, it would not get restricted at a leadership level, but it would be role based, and it would be for every level, and it would be an inclusion of the points that you've mentioned, that it's necessary that there should be a nurturing aspect. It's necessary that there should be, you know, a more team holistic. And when you talk about digital literacy, so these things is where that can be taken care of if you have a customized competency framework which are role based, because then it is about the role, it's not about a hierarchy, you know. So that is that could be the possible answer for the times to come. So next question, first we'll come to Mr. Sunil for his quick response, and then we'll go to Ms. Rati so that we can excuse Mr. Sunil quickly. So Mr. Sunil, even for organizations who have competencies in place, you know, the level of maturity varies as to the percolation of competencies. So competencies hona ek baat hai, but are they percolated? Like, are they being used for assessments, for developments, for hyper, for succession planning, for any other form of percolation? So what are your views on this aspect with regards to percolation of competencies?
I think whatever good experiences I have around these behaviors is how is it getting integrated with all the HR processes, whether it is performance management system or whether it are performance appraisal, and all places, how is it getting imbibed into those processes, because that's what happens. Otherwise, competency are A and your appraisal process is at a B process. So that's one fundamental aspect. So all in the life cycle of the employee, if the competency behaviors are available from a point of view of strategy and policies, then the second question starts is, are we having enough discussions around those behaviors, right? And that's where the challenge is, because with so much environment changing so fast, to stone cast or hard cast competencies is a tough business. You know, if the environment is changing, my responses need to be adaptable in terms of doing that. So we'll have to go into fundamental universal competencies, as we say, some of them, not trait-like competencies, but universal competencies. So I'm segregating that. There are certain things which are trait-like. I'm not talking of trait-like competencies. I'm talking of universal competencies in terms of doing that. And that's very, that becomes very difficult because the control goes out of the whole system. So That is my response to that. I know it's all over the place. My response is not very concrete in terms of doing that. But the challenge is inbuilt in the percolation is what I'm trying to emphasize upon. If I sit with the group and talk about what are the behaviors that are leading them to do a superior performance, is the discussion that I'm interested in. I am not interested in the discussion of what competencies are there and what are getting demonstrated. You know, when we turn this whole discussion around for the employees, tell us what is working for you. Now, if there is a competency framework already, then it becomes very straight-jacketed in terms of, but when it becomes this, then that is where the people start talking about what behaviors are helping, what behaviors are not helping. And then your R&R works on that. R&R works on performance. Competency is slightly lower than in that it's a lag lead indicator. Its competency building is somewhere there. So the whole focus is about interest in the people. And if there is interest in the people, then things will automatically happen for the organization. We are too X-oriented rather than being Y-oriented. We want to be Y-oriented. We espouse to be Y-oriented. I think Rati also talked about values. We espouse to be Y-oriented, but we are very X-oriented in our, get the McGregor's XY 50s mein banaya, abhi bhi valid hai in terms of doing that. So my question is not about percolation of competency. My question is about what is working for the employees, and that's very important. And you may reward the performance and so on and so forth. No two doubts about it. But competency building is something else. People have, if they are ethical, I think Rati's made a very pertinent point. If the values are in place, why leave it at that, and people will find their competent ways of solving the problems. Give them a chance.
Right, great. So have the values and have the ethics within the competencies as well as like you mentioned. If values are what drive and what take forward the organization, then why not take it a step ahead and actually make it more objective and more practical for people to practice by defining the behaviors. So there are several things that can work around even the values. So thank you so much, Mr. Sunil, for giving us your valuable time, for sharing your insights, sharing some passionate responses on the questions that were posed to you. And we'll continue the discussion with Ms. Rati. Maybe we'll take up a couple of questions too. And we'll reach out to you maybe for some other topic when you have good amount of time on your hand.
Thank you very much for having me. So apologies, Rati, for pushing out, but I hope you'll understand.
For leaving me in between.
No,
thank you, Mr.
You are in best hands. Sujata, you are in best hands of Rati. She makes a lot of sense. And so I think your participants will gain more by that.
Yeah, but I'm sure, Mr. Sunil, even I'm making quite a lot of sense. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, since you're the host, the credit goes to Rati. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. So, Ms. Rati, the views that Mr. Sunil was sharing on, the percolation, and when he's talking about competencies and when he's from where he comes, what I can gauge is that it's ultimately the answer might lie in role-based, customized competency framework, because that is where you can even bring up the discussions of what is working for the people. Where does how the top performers, what behaviors are actually exhibited by the top performers so that can be replicated, duplicated, others can be trained upon it, and maybe that's the way ahead. But I would like to hear your views about, even organizations who have competencies in place may not percolate it through their employee life cycle or through various HR processes. So what are your views on this aspect?
So Sujata, let me take a practical example. And for example, if I look at my own organization or any FMCG or FMCD organization, wherein most of the population comprises of feet on street guys or the salespeople who are there at the ground level. Now, if we refer back to a competency framework, most of the organizations will have very nice looking, very beautifully jotted down competency, which will have words like strategic thinking, coaching and developing, leading people. A lot of such words we will see in the competency framework. Now, if we look at the people who typically comprises of 80% of our organization's population, the people who are on the ground, for them, how much relevance will these competencies have? For what's really important for them is that they want the business to be done and they should get recognized for it. They should do business in absolutely ethical manner. That's something that's absolutely undebatable. But what they want to do is that give me my tools, give me my equipments so that I can fight out in the market, go and tell people why they should buy a health insurance policy. How will it help them from not probably experiencing a really crisis situation, when it comes to medical requirement, how they should tell people that which policy suits them basis their health condition, basis the age bracket they are in. They are not really interested in terms of what strategy should I be making, how should I be developing or coaching my people. That is something that people at senior level are supposed to do, right? So the point that I'm making is that it's not, I mean, a lot of organizations make this mistake that they standardize those competencies and they expect everyone to follow in the same bracket, which is really not required and which is not feasible. So what you said is right, that basis the role, we need to identify which competencies are relevant, or even if it is not required, for certain roles you may not even require some set of competencies. So that's one, that you make it more relevant to the role that the person is doing. Secondly, how do you integrate when you have identified that these are the competencies which are required for the role? How do you integrate the entire HR system around it? So, for example, if I have got my performance management system, am I assessing the person only on the results that he or she brings? Or am I also looking at how he or she displayed those competencies while getting those results? Yeah. So I need to give equal credit both to the outcome and as well as to the methodology in terms of how they have got that particular result. If I am assessing that person that, okay, you've got 100% achievement on your goal sheet and therefore you get a 2 rating or a 3 rating, then why would somebody be even interested to develop on competency front? Right? Similarly, when we talk about talent management, if you are not able to tell the person that for you to move either vertically or laterally in this particular role, you need to develop on this particular competency, or this particular competency is your strength, continue to harness it. Yeah, we need to go back and tell that person. Otherwise, for him, again, there's no relevance of competency. So somewhere all of this has to be integrated so that the right people know what is it that they have to work upon, and the same is percolated down to the lowest level. That's really my view in terms of, when we talk about percolation of competency across all the levels.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Rati. In fact, thank you so much that you've explained it so simplistically and in such a clear manner that it's that is the and thanks for advocating once again that there's a need for role-based competencies, because not necessary, like you've rightly mentioned, not necessarily every leadership related competency would reflect and hold true for someone who's in the field day in and day out and has certain very clear job objectives to meet. So yes, that is what calls for role-based competencies, because there may be an overlap of certain behavioral competencies across your roles, because they might be the some sort of behavioral competencies that an organization does not wish to compromise on, whether it's an entry-level job or a leadership level job. But apart from those certain, certain 2 to 3 behavioral non-compromisable competencies, what are the actual functional, technical, and on the job competencies that might be required? So that's the whole point. That's where this entire area of competency framework needs a fundamental realignment, that do not just go in and define just organizational level competencies and expect everyone to fit the bill. Rather, as per the role, define the competencies that you expect that individual to actually focus on and to display and to act upon and to develop further. So thank you so much, Ms. Rati, for sharing this pertinent example when you talked about your the people who are working and who are on field day in and day out. They obviously, when it comes to strategic thing or when it comes to certain leadership role, how much can they really relate to those sort of competencies? Thank you for that example.
And Sujata, just I'm adding this thing here. Well, I'm saying that certain competencies may not be relevant for different set of people, but what really, I mean, which I strongly believe, and I really advocate for it, is there are certain values which cannot just be compromised. So
Certainly.
irrespective that you may be having certain competencies or may not be having, but things like integrity, ethics, this is something which has to be part of your value system, irrespective of the level or the function that you may be at.
Well, very correctly and very profoundly mentioned once again the importance of values, and that is what we to simplify things. It's always nice to look at it in a more holistic manner. Yes, values are something that should not be compromised. So focus on values, but to those values, how do you bring an alignment between your values, your competency frameworks, or vice versa? From that perspective also. And if you have values, actually defining what are the behaviors which should not be compromised, because it's not an individual who's practicing that value, because for an external entity, it is the organization. It's not Ms. Rati who's today speaking, but today here Max Bupa Health Insurance is being represented. Here creating values is being represented. So we are not just employees, we are not just individuals, but we are the brand ambassadors of our organization. So that is where the importance of values and not compromising on the values that your organization stands for. So thank you so much for re-establishing that. Yes, certain philosophies, but also certain practical touch points which are absolutely imperative when it comes from a talent management strategy as well as a people capital management strategy for 2021 stands. So with that, I think these were some of the structured questions that we had for our panel discussion today. We just have one of the questions where somewhere that question was already touched upon in a different manner by you, Ms. Rati, but I would still put it forth. There have been always these concerns about budget cuts and budget restrictions when it comes to any sort of talent management intervention that an HR needs to pull through, especially in troubled times. So what can you advise when it comes to budget constraints, but versus choosing an important intervention for talent management?
Sure, Siddharth. And I think it's very pertinent. All of us face that. And I will put it in a slightly different way. Well, cost is something that that's not the only factor that we should look at. As I said earlier, I think we should, for any initiative, I mean, any initiative for that matter, we should look at the relevance of doing that particular initiative and not just for the sake of doing it. And also, we should look at what's the outcome and how will we use that outcome to generate higher returns for the organization. I think if we are able to answer these three questions, then we should surely be able to get the budget. And there are much more smarter ways of doing any initiative in a much more cost effective manner these days. We have done it ourselves. So there were times when we also had limited budget. We said, okay, we will look at it in a different manner. There are certain things that we have in-housed, and we have a beautiful team who's very good, be it in terms of technology or be it in terms of creativity. There are a few things that have been developed in-house. And trust me, there are enough and more partners who are available in the market, and you can get your solution at a much more competitive rate and at the quality that you expect. So I think we should not really talk about only cost whenever we are thinking about initiative. That's something that comes later. First, you need to address that why do we want to do it? What's the outcome expected? How are we going to use that particular data? And then look at different methodologies within the approved budget that we have in place.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Ms. Rati, for that advice, and very relevantly mentioned that yes, the relevance of the intervention, the outcomes which are expected, what would you do with the data? And then looking for partners and looking for a hybrid model of operations, even for important interventions. You know, what section can be dealt with internally, and for which sections would you require external partners? And then, like I mentioned earlier, versus the bigger players, there are several boutique consulting and partners which actually work in conjunction with clients to manage not just the budgets front but also what was the end result which is expected, and who customize their solutions accordingly. And so that's the way of looking at effective cost management for important interventions that should not be overlooked or should not be derailed or delayed just because of budgets. Another aspect that we've been advising organizations, and even in our prior Qbinars where speakers have also talked about it, is about if there is a major intervention that you wish to go for and the entire budget is not approved in one go, think about picking up a smaller slice. Think about doing a pilot project. The once you do a pilot project, once you see the results, that gives enough data for HR to go back, show results, show the outcome for the approval for the next phase of the project. So in a way, it's not just about showing the outcome, but it's also about cutting your costs into smaller chunks, which can be taken on board even in difficult times, because that intervention is important from a human capital enablement perspective. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much for giving us your time and for sharing your insights, your observations, your learnings with all of our audience. And I'm sure organizations who and HR fraternity who would watch this either live or the recorded version, they would have a lot to think about and to discuss internally. So if there are any subsequent questions that come up from us, from any of our attendees, I would reach out to you one-on-one for a response on it. But like I mentioned, thank you so much for your time. And now I take this opportunity to thank our viewers, the ones who have been regulars with us. Thank you so much. You have made these Qbinars what it is today, and we've been doing it since April of last year. So it's a long journey. So I'm hoping that in the coming months, we'll see more traction, we'll see more speakers. If there are any specific topics that even HR is struggling with and they wish to hear other speakers discuss about it, please feel free to get in touch with us to talk about those topics. And depending on the relevance of the topic and depending on the availability of certain speakers, we will try and align those sessions in the coming time. So thank you so much, audience, and thank you so much once again, Ms. Rati, for being a part of this webinar.
Thank you, Sujata, and to the Creating Values team. It's very important to stay relevant in the given scenario, and you guys are really doing a great job of helping all of us learn and perform better during this pandemic. So thanks to you for doing that. Thank you,
Thank you
Sujata.
so much. And with that, it is Creating Values Qbinar Friday signing off for today. Hope to see you soon. Maybe in the next 2 weeks, we will roll out the details of our next Qbinar on LinkedIn. So please follow us on LinkedIn for the details. Thank you so much.